All right, I'm going to read through the charges that we have on Diddy. So count 2, sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura, not guilty. Count 3, the Mann Act transportation on Cassie Ventura, guilty. Count 4, sex trafficking of Jane, not guilty. And count 5, Mann Act transportation of Jane, guilty. Let's bring back Mercedes Colwin. Now as we have these charges being laid out, the most serious of these, he is being acquitted for, that would have led to life in prison. As David just laid out, now the maximum penalty is 10 years. Any surprises here, and does this make sense where the jury landed based on the evidence and the testimony we heard?
Really surprised about Cassie Ventura. I mean, from all reporting about the way she testified, how clear she was, the amount of violence that she endured as a result of this relationship that she had, the fact that the prosecution brought in an expert, this is Dr. Don Hughes, that talked about the fact that when these women are in a cycle of violence, it's very hard for women and men, obviously, if they're also in a violent relationship, to withdraw from those relationships, that there is this incredible psychological hold that batterers have with their partners that they're battering. It's just it's a big surprise. As I said earlier, Jane Doe, not a surprise, because she had to, during cross-examination, admit that she still accepted $10,000 a month from Combs to meet her expenses. So that certainly would undercut her credibility. But Cassie was clear that she did not want to engage in these freak-offs, that she felt uncomfortable, that she was subjected to severe violence if she didn't actually acquiesce. But of course, consent is a very murky issue. And as someone who is a defense attorney who actually represents individuals who are alleged to have engaged in sexual misconduct, it's murky. And those types of cases, if the jury does not believe the victims, it really leads to an acquittal. And obviously, the defense did a masterful job of doing effective enough cross-examination to show that both women must have consented to what they alleged they didn't.
Again, not guilty on that major count 1 charge of racketeering conspiracy that would have led to life in prison. Mercedes, stand by. I want to go back to Alicia Nieves. She is outside the courthouse in New York. There are microphones set up. Once this is read formally before the court, then we expect people to be spilling out into the street, and we'll address the media. Just set the scene for us, Alicia. Who's there and what we think may happen next?
Yeah, you've got to imagine after, beating the most serious charges in this case, to your point there, the racketeering RICO charge, and certainly the sex trafficking charge, that Mark Agnifico, one of the attorneys for Sean Diddy Combs, who delivered closing arguments, and maybe even Sean Diddy Combs, if there's a chance of that, will come out and address the public. I don't know if you can see behind me. I'm going to try to step out the way here for a second, but there are hundreds of people who have started to pull out of the courtroom, some of the overflow courtrooms, and they're standing outside waiting eagerly, potentially for them to hear from Agnifico and maybe even from a representative of Sean Diddy Combs. His mother, we know, is in court right now. 6 of his 7 children are in court at the moment, the youngest being a toddler who hasn't been here throughout the trial. But again, any moment now, somebody from the defense side or from Sean Diddy Combs' family could speak. And so you have hundreds of people here. You mentioned the verdict a moment ago. Our producer, who was inside one of those overflow rooms, just came out a few minutes ago, being one of the producers running out the courtroom, to give us the verdict a slip. And, one thing she expressed to me was that in the overflow room, as the verdicts were being announced, you cannot, have any outcries or any noise inside the actual courtroom, but in the overflow room, people were screaming and cheering. She said one person actually not fainted, but dropped down to their knees as one of the verdicts came out. That is the verdict of guilty for the Mann Act itself. This is going to be an exciting moment for many people, or at least a charged moment for many people. Hundreds whom are outside this courtroom just waiting any moment for the defense possibly to talk, or somebody from Diddy's family. Again, he beat the serious charges here, the charges where he was facing 15 years to life. And as best we understand, and I think our legal expert said it a moment ago, he potentially could do time served or just get a fine for the Mann Act charges that he was found guilty on, those 2 counts. Marnie?
Jury deliberations in the case against Sean Diddy Combs off to a rocky start yesterday. Jurors weighed the case for more than 5 hours on Monday and are set to resume discussions about 9 o'clock Eastern this morning. But they may have already hit a serious snag just one day in. NewsNation's Xavier Walton is following this one for us. Xavier, walk us through what's going on behind the scenes there, because I understand that some jurors are already worried that one of their own could cause these deliberations to just totally break down.
Hey, Marky, good morning. And a major snag is the correct way of putting it. We're just a couple of hours away, 2 hours away from day 2 of deliberations in the racketeering and sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs, right? Two shockers that everybody's going to really want to pay attention to as it gets underway for day 2 this morning. 4 notes in total passed yesterday. That's not out of the ordinary coming from this 12-person jury to judge Arun Subramanian. The first was really standard, notifying the jury who the jury foreman is, for the remainder of this. But then 1 hour into deliberations, this is where it got interesting. The jury foreman sent one note saying, quote, "We are concerned juror 25 cannot follow your honor's instructions. One of the jurors is having trouble following the judge's instructions regarding the law." So the judge quickly sent a note back reminding them of their duty to stick to the instructions. Remember, the jury has to come to a unanimous verdict to convict the music mogul, Sean Diddy Combs. Legal analyst and retired Judge Barry Kamen says a note like this is really rare, and it could help the defense if it underscores the jurors are struggling to review the case together.
It's really unusual for after 1 hour to get a note like that. This is someone who's sticking to their guns and not agreeing with a lot of what the other jurors are saying. That's the kind of person that the defense wants.
Okay, so after 5 hours together, the jurors sent a third note about their start time today. Now, the fourth note is interesting as well. That's where they're going to pick up this morning. It was a question to the judge, basically asking if someone is handing drugs to someone, ask for them, could that be considered distribution of narcotics? So that's where we're going to pick up today here in just a couple of hours with deliberations day 2.
Brian, stand by with us if you can. I'm going to bring in a couple of other guests here. We have on a lot. We still have Randy as well, because we have David Weinstein joining us, okay? Dave Arenberg's joining us down in Florida, and I think we have Randy Zellen joining us. So we can go around the room here and get some thoughts. David Weinstein first. Former federal prosecutor, first up, also from Florida. And there's Randy. What do you make, David Weinstein, of all this so far? And, Randy was saying earlier he thinks they might be split on those other charges as they try to figure it out on RICO. What's your thoughts?
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Look, okay. They may have found one of the sex trafficking charges to have stuck here. So that's one of the predicate acts that they have to do in the RICO conspiracy. And even if they found him guilty on both of the sex trafficking charges, they need one more to find him guilty on the RICO conspiracy. It's also possible they acquitted on the transportation charges, and so that one's not a predicate act they can rely on, even if they found them guilty on the sex trafficking. And it could be one or more of the victims. Maybe they believed Cassandra that she was in fact sex trafficked, but not transported. So that leaves them one predicate act. They've got a laundry list of additional predicate acts they could find, and they just can't agree on another one. And some or all of the jurors are saying, well, that's it. We're done. We're finished. I don't agree that there was bribery. I don't agree that we heard talk about drug distribution. So maybe they've got a couple who think drugs were distributed, even though people asked for it. It could also be a compromise verdict. They could have said, look, we'll come to a compromise here. We're going to acquit them on the conspiracy count, the RICO, because we know that's probably going to punish him longer. And we'll find him guilty on one or more of the substantive acts, either the sex trafficking or the transportation. It's unclear. If there's a split verdict like that and it's inconsistent to some degree, that's going to be an argument on appeal. There's also some arguments about the overspill of all the evidence they brought in on the conspiracy charge. And then getting to whether or not they're going to go back in, I find it hard to believe, too, they're going to declare a mistrial. They were in trial for 7 weeks. Even if you throw out the days it was just argument, you're talking about at least 30 days worth of trial testimony. They've only been deliberating for 2. And so I think he'll send them back in. Prosecution's pushing hard for the Allen charge, the dynamite charge. It says you have to abandon your beliefs as to one side and go to the other. The defense says it's too early for that, but I think it's too early for a mistrial. I think we're probably looking at a split verdict. So maybe only one of the 4 substantive counts, and they just find him not guilty on the others based on the witness's testimony. I find it hard to believe they found him guilty on all 4 of the substantive counts and then couldn't quickly click off the boxes in the RICO verdict form, because those are 2 of the predicate acts. So a bit of a mystery to me, Connell.
David Weinstein wrapping his head around it as he says. Dave Arenberg, what about you?
All good analysis, Conable. Here's how I see it. This is bad news for Diddy because despite that juror who came out early and apparently wasn't going to follow the instructions, it looks like they've got him on human trafficking. I think Cassie, that was the stronger of the 2. I agree on the analysis that Jane wasn't as strong of a victim, and so I think they got him on Cassie, and I do think they've got him on the Mann Act. That was always the easiest one, the transportation of prostitutes across state lines. That was easy. So why can't they come to an agreement on racketeering, as David just said? I think it's because they're not convinced this was a criminal enterprise, perhaps just an ad hoc group of people doing different things in different directions and, yeah, doing bad things. But to get their head around that this is like the mob, the mafia, that's harder to do. And that's why I think that it's a hung jury right now for racketeering, but a conviction on human trafficking, at least as it relates to Cassie. Right. And of the Mann Act violations.
Got to squeeze in one commercial break before we do that. Randy, where do you stand versus what Dave and David have said here over the last 2 minutes?
I always love being the least intelligent one on the panel.
I don't know about that.
Everyone's, Dave and David's and Brian's analyses are spot on. For me, where it falls is you've got the July 4th holiday coming up. These jurors are not coming back after the weekend, so I think that we will see a verdict probably no later than either Wednesday night or Thursday morning.
Stay with us. One more thing here. I'll just add from our NewsNation station here in New York, Pix 11 News down there covering it as well, that there was a note in the jury note that there are, quote, jurors that are impersuadable on both sides as to count 1. Marcus. So that's kind of interesting, right? Because that's going to go back to the racketeering conspiracy. I'm going to have it on the tablet. You can pop it up if we want. But if you look at the United States versus Sean Combs, count 1's a racketeering conspiracy charge, okay? So this is the one, as Misty was talking about earlier, that carries the possibility of life in prison. You see count 2 in sex trafficking and then the transportation to engage in prostitution. The way it breaks down, there are 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. That's how you get up to 5. So to go back to that first point on count 1, right, the most serious charge, there are jurors, as it's being reported at least in the note, that are tough to persuade on both sides. So maybe that, look at all the reporters and cameras that are there, maybe that tells you that there's going to be some work to do. But it seemed like the judge, right, as you were saying, wants them to continue that work if they can.
I think so, because I think they're so close to the finish line here. And what I'm interested to find out is if this day continues or if this goes into tomorrow and what happens next. So that first count, that's the count really everybody has been focusing on, because that is the most complicated one, that racketeering conspiracy, right, that we've been talking about. And that makes sense that the jurors inside that courtroom also struggled with that count as well. And so I think you piece together kind of the bits of information that are coming in right now at this point. I think the judge wants to persuade them to go back in and to keep talking about that particular count and try to figure out a verdict on that, because that one clearly is the one that's holding them up the most. This happens in trials here in deliberations before, and it's something the judge always kind of gives them another push, right? Sometimes they just need another bit of like, okay, we understand where you're at so far. Head back in. We know there's an issue with this particular count, but head back in and try to go over it again. Now, how much time they'll have to go over it today, I think that's a big question, too. How much longer are they going to be deliberating inside? Because in the past, they've been pretty much stopping about 5 o'clock there, and that was the case yesterday. So you kind of take a look at the entire day, you see all the questions asked, and they moved pretty quickly. That was surprising to me, because they were asking questions and very detailed questions. They were asking for testimony that was extremely long in text, and that was going to take a long time to go through. So I don't know about you, Connell, but I was surprised that they they made their way through all of that written testimony that they requested, those transcripts there, right?
All right, yeah, no, you're right. Marcus, thank you. You're right about that. Let me make one more point. We'll get a break. Top of the hour, we'll come back. We'll keep covering this. Maybe we'll get some more details on it. I was just looking here at the breakdown on that count one. If you find the defendant guilty of count one, the racketeering conspiracy charge, which types of racketeering acts do you unanimously find were involved in the offense? Because remember, this is basically saying is running a criminal enterprise. Acts involving kidnapping, arson, bribery, witness tampering, forced labor, sex trafficking, transportation for purposes of prostitution, acts involving drug distribution. And the way it's written, if and only if you find the defendant guilty of count one, did the pattern of racketeering activity include sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura, Cassie. So that's the kind of way that they phrase it, because this is a very serious charge, again, in the past reserved for the likes of mobsters. So this is the breaking news on the United States versus Sean Combs. You have more, Marcus? Did you say you had more, Marcus?
Yeah, and I want to add a note here. There's a third option from the judge to accept the partial verdict. So that's an interesting third option there. I'm not sure if you've discussed that before, but that is a third note that just came in as well a minute ago. So that is a possibility, too, of just accepting this, and then we got to unravel that from there. So I think that note from my producer, Ava Pittman, inside right now just came in that is a third option. Attorneys are conferring on what to tell the jury. So both sides, again, this is what happens, right? You have the defense and the prosecution, and then these options, and then the judge. Is kind of this dance going on right now because of this one hang-up on that one count. But that is a third option right now, accept a partial verdict. So it will be very interesting to see what this decision is. We're going to stay absolutely on top of this.
Joining us now, entertainment attorney Trey Lovell. We've been talking throughout this case, 6 weeks of testimony, the prosecution trying to connect the dots to get a conviction here. How difficult will it be for this jury just to understand the task at hand, and how will the judge instruct them today?
It's going to be difficult because these are complicated charges, racketeering, sex trafficking. They're not your garden variety criminal charges. And so a lot of attention is going to need to be made to make it simple for the jury to understand, you know, to meet this element, to meet that element, so that they're not getting confused and we come up with the wrong verdict. So it's really a challenge with those jury instructions and the jury verdict form. They're going to be very meticulous to make it as easy and straightforward as they can. Because that's really the roadmap that allows the jurors to determine, you know, whether or not there's, there should be a conviction or there's a crime here.
So given that, are we expecting that this deliberation will take longer than usual? What should we know going into this about timing?
I think it's going to take longer than normal. Usually when there's a quick verdict, it happens one of two ways. First of all, it's a slam dunk case. And it's clear that there was a crime that happened and there should be a conviction. Or it's just absolutely not a good case at all and the jury comes back fast. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of things to consider. And I think the jury is going to have to take its time to go over everything, all the pieces of evidence. We're talking about 34 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, a lot of testimony. So there's a lot to go over. And most juries take their job very seriously. They don't want to rush it. They understand, you know, that somebody's life's at stake, the liberty of that person, and they want to get it right. So I would assume that this is going to take a little bit longer than normal.
Do you think, Trey, given all of the testimony that you heard as you followed this case, it's more likely they'll find him guilty on one of the charges? And if so, which one?
You know, I think it's an uphill battle with RICO and the racketeering, just because there's a lot of questions there, whether or not this was a personal lifestyle or it was an actual criminal enterprise. And the sex trafficking, you know, I think the fact that these are personal relationships, these are girlfriends, you know, some lasting 10 years, that's not going to fall on deaf ears. So I think they may have an uphill battle with those. The one charge they may get a little bit easier is the prostitution one, the transportation to engage in prostitution, because there is evidence that they transported these sex workers across state lines. And if the jury believes it's prostitution, then they've met the element. So I think they're going to have a challenge on the two big ones, and they may have an easier time on the prostitution one.
Yeah, I mean, what a case to watch. How about the argument from the defense, Trey, that these were willing participants? And then how does that reconcile with the video that the jury saw of Cassie, his girlfriend at the time, in that hotel room?
You know, the big competing themes in this have been coercion versus consent. And the defense is just hammered. This is consent. This is a private relationship that, yes, it went bad. There was violence and that should have never happened. But this was between two loving people. This is their lifestyle. And it certainly didn't cross the line to criminality. And you know, the jury's going to really kind of take that to heart. You know, the defense is pounding two things. Really, they want to go at the elements. They want to go at reasonable doubt, but they're trying to strike something bigger here. It's like, hey, this is above Sean Diddy Combs. You know, this attacks every one of us about the government coming in our bedroom. You know, if you have some guy that's had a string of a few bad relationships, what now they're going to go after him for racketeering? I mean, where are we going with this? And so they want to leave the jury with a little bit of something more. So this is bigger than Combs. This is really important. And I think they accomplished that. So, you know, it's really two competing factions. And you know, the jury's they're going to have their hands full. I think it's going to be a tough deliberation.
All right, well, here we go. We'll wait and see.
Closing arguments today in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial, with the defense team driving home its central argument that Sean Combs most certainly committed some crimes, just not the ones he's been charged with. The defense summation lasted just over 4 hours. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, struck a sarcastic and at times mocking tone, suggesting the trial was a farce. He acknowledged Combs' physical abuse against Cassie Ventura, the mogul's former girlfriend and a key government witness. But he reiterated that Combs is charged with sex trafficking and racketeering, not with domestic violence. Agnifilo went even further. He described the couple's relationship as a, quote, great modern love story. As for that infamous 2016 video you're looking at right now, showing Combs violently beating Ventura in a hotel lobby, Agnifilo suggested it was merely an argument over Combs' cell phone, not because Cassie Ventura was trying to escape one of his infamous freak-off parties. He said Ventura was actually the winner in this whole ordeal, saying she was, quote, sitting somewhere with $30 million, a reference to her settlements from Sean Combs and the hotel where that video was shot. That comment got a scathing response and rebuttals from the prosecutors, insisting that Ventura was no winner, but rather beaten black and blue in the incident, adding the fight was not about a cell phone. The jury is now set to figure all this out. They're going to be charged on Monday morning, get the jury instructions from the judge, and then they will begin deliberating right away. If Sean Combs is convicted on all of these charges, he could be put away for life. Joining us to break it all down is Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor and Law and Crime Network host, and Robert Hirschhorn, lawyer and trial and jury consultant. Great to have both of you with us. I nearly spit out my coffee when I heard that the defense attorneys called it was a great modern love story between Cassie Ventura and Sean Combs after listening to her sworn testimony.
Well, that's a nightmare if that's the great modern love story. Look, there are people who will say he minimized too much. He minimized everything that was going on. It was had an explanation for all of the underlying crimes as part of racketeering. I will tell you there were some wins here. Now, what do I mean by that? I think he made a really good point by saying this case is about the text messages, and you and I have talked before. The text messages of Cassie, the text messages of Jane, the text messages of Mia, they're problematic. It doesn't make it a clear-cut case when they're praising Sean Combs or loving Sean Combs or setting up these sexual events where he said today, let me get this straight. So some events are consensual, and then all of a sudden it goes up 100 to sex trafficking. That's a big jump. The problem is what happened in rebuttal. The prosecution said, so you want us to believe, the defense wants you to believe that Cassie wanted to be urinated on, that these women wanted to be beaten and then have to engage in these sexual events. They wanted to have UTIs and to keep doing this. And by the way, you mentioned it before, Cassie settled her lawsuit. Mia settled in mediation. What is their incentive to testify and put their character and potentially risk perjury now? What is their goal in testifying in a case? And I have to say, since they have the prosecution, that's the last thing the jury heard. You wonder if that's what they're going to be resonating with.
You thought it was powerful. Robert, you think Sean Combs is a despicable guy, but he's not guilty. Why?
I think the government's overcharged him. Elizabeth, by the way, thanks for having me back. I mean, look, the things he did were outrageous, but his conduct is freako conduct. It's not RICO conduct. His conduct in terms of the trafficking, he's just a swinger. He's not a trafficker. Here's the point. Do we really want the government kind of coming in, the United States government coming into our bedrooms, into our relationships? I don't think any of us want that. Do I think he's guilty of a lot of things? Absolutely, but not RICO, not the sex trafficking. They overcharged him.
You know, that was something you said at the beginning of this trial, Jesse. You don't feel as sure any longer that
Here's what I think. He's facing 5 charges. 95% he gets convicted on the transportation to engage in prostitution charges. I think that is a slam dunk. I'm 60-40 on racketeering. Why? While the prosecution has done a great job at establishing and checking off the boxes with a number of the underlying crimes the prosecution needs to prove too, what Agnifilo did
We had a whole host of employees and assistants who said, I went and bought his drugs for him.
Sure.
I went and covered the hotel room in sheets and towels and stocked it with crates of baby oil for him. I went and hid Cassie in a hotel after you beat her up so that she could recover from the black and blue marks. I didn't know what was going on in those, behind closed doors.
And they said Christina Quorum, as chief of staff, saw all the text messages. It's impossible they didn't know what was going on. Having said that, what Agnifilo did do well today, he goes, where is the criminal enterprise? Not one person testified they were part of a criminal enterprise.
Right.
And for racketeering conspiracy, while you don't need an agreement, there does need to be a sense everybody on the same page. Was it established based on the testimony? Was it established based on the text messages? Maybe, but that may be something that hangs up the jury. And with sex trafficking, it all comes whether or not they're willing participants in all of this.
Robert, do you think it was a mistake for the defense to have literally no case, that after all these weeks of listening to the prosecution's case, the defense didn't call a single person to the witness stand?
Yeah, I do. From a jury perspective, I do, because the jury, they're human beings. They want to hear from both sides, even though the judge tells them the defendant doesn't have a burden of proof. I think part of that decision the defense made was based on the appellate issues. You don't want to give the appellate court a reason to not reverse a conviction because you got up and put on testimony that obviously wasn't believed. But look, here's the thing, Elizabeth and Jesse. The prosecutor, the assistant United States attorney, in her rebuttal said something that was fascinating that I think the jury's going to take with them this weekend. She called Diddy's conduct inexcusable behavior. Guess what? It was. But when a person's a rapist, do you call that conduct inexcusable? When a person is a mafia boss, do you call his conduct inexcusable? A drug dealer? No. It's criminal conduct, not inexcusable. Inexcusable conduct, I think, is the kind that jurors could very well decide not guilty based on this evidence.
Do you agree?
I think she did a great job of establishing without whatever language she actually used. At the end of the day, what escalates this beyond domestic violence is the sex workers. What escalates it is the violence. What escalates it is the drugs. What escalates it is the use of staff and bodyguards. And whether the defense wants to say, oh, he didn't pay $100,000 to take that tape of Cassie Ventura because he didn't want his private information. Is the jury going to believe that, or going to think he didn't want to get arrested? He was trying to cover up a crime. I have no idea what this jury's thinking. I will tell you this much. I think they're going to deliberate for quite some time on a case like this.
How long do you think it's going to be?
I know the holiday weekend, they want to get out of there, but I think they're going to take, literally to the last minute. They have to. This is a complicated case.
They're not going to go over the 4th of July holiday.
Unlikely, but you never know. This is, so much information, so many elements, complicated charges, a lot of evidence. They may.
Robert, how many days?
I think I agree with Jesse. It's going to be a lengthy deliberation. It wouldn't surprise me if there's at least 1 or 2 jurors that say, I'm sorry, I don't think this evidence rises to these particular offenses. I don't think they're going to go past 4th of July. I think if you get a couple of jurors that really hold their ground, the judge may very well be declaring a mistrial.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. All right. Jesse Weber, Robert Hirschhorn, thank you both so much.
After weeks of witness testimony and shocking reveals inside the Manhattan courtroom, the criminal case against Sean Diddy Combs is now in the hands of a jury. 12 men and women will now decide if Combs is guilty of running a criminal enterprise, sex trafficking women, and transporting individuals for prostitution. I'm criminal trial attorney Sarah Azari, and this is Serving Justice, where we will break down this crucial final day before the jury began deliberations in the trial that has captured the nation's attention. I'm joined today by NewsNation digital reporter Safiya Sami Ali, who has been following this trial since the very, very beginning. Safiya, thank you so much for being available a little earlier than usual today. Boy, today was kind of significant. We thought the case was going to go to the jury and, we're going to have a little break for a day. But interestingly, I want to start with the first and most serious count against Combs, which carries a 5-year statute of limitations, meaning the jury must find that Combs's racketeering conspiracy continued beyond September 2019. In other words, the jury must find a crime, I call it the hook crime, he committed in the last 5 years, which is the federal statute of limitations, in order for the racketeering statute to reach back decades at a time to all these other predicate acts that we heard testimony about. They also must be unanimous on at least one specific instance for the sex trafficking charge. So break this down for us. Why is this so significant in terms of the instructions?
Well, the statute of limitations, that's under law. For RICO, you have to have, it's a 5-year limit where if, and we can take a step back and talk about why that is. Now, statute of limitations, they're there in order to make sure that things are fair and things are done efficiently, where if you just let something happen and just kind of let it sit there forever, that's not very fair to a defendant who can essentially think I'm going to be prosecuted any time. So what the law essentially tries to stop here is that basically it makes prosecutors move forward with investigations, investigators with investigations, prosecutors with whatever charges they want to bring, because as time goes by, Sarah, memories fade, evidence gets lost.
Witnesses die, or they
witnesses die. Exactly. Yeah. The integrity of an investigation gets lower and lower. So that's why with the statute of limitations, you're making sure that you're pushing through and getting the most integrity in an investigation. Yeah. So now here in this case, this 5-year limitations is super important because, and that this is why Jane is so important.
Yeah.
This is a really tight timeline. Yeah. Cassie and Diddy broke up in 2018. That's before 2019. So they need, and Cassie's the big witness here. She's like, in my opinion, she's going to be, that's what they're going to get her on. And so in order to get Cassie,
if they get him on sex trafficking,
if they get him on sex trafficking, 100%. In order for them to be able to reach back and get everything that happened with Cassie, they need to have Jane, who opens the door with that 5-year, because Jane was with Diddy.
So that's really interesting, because remember we were talking about why even have her testify? She seemed like more of like a defense witness. There you go.
That's exactly right. I think that they needed her in order to open that door, because they couldn't get to Cassie without Jane. That's the bridge.
Correct. Okay. So it's unfortunate that we don't have Tommy with us, because number one, he's always brought so much layperson insight to this conversation that's critical, because that's what most of our viewers are wondering, but also because he was in the courtroom today and there was an issue with a juror. This juror is seated in seat number 3, but on the roster from the pool of jurors, this juror is juror number 25. And from what I understand, he is like a 51-year-old. I believe he's Latino. I'm not sure 100%. And he's a scientist. And the foreperson, who is juror number 2, is a white male, fairly younger. They're estimating, in his early 30s or so. He has been taking diligent notes, even when the other jurors stopped taking notes. He's just going. He's watching the trial like a hawk. He's very, very diligent. But he's also been responsive to Mark Agnifilo, laughing along at some of his, lighthearted arguments. He has nodded when there was testimony about how hardworking Combs has been in these sort of businesses that he's built in the Combs enterprise. So hard read on this guy, but he is the foreperson. He writes a note to the judge saying that juror number 25 has some sort of I don't want to say mental condition, but from people that have been in the courtroom, what I hear is that he has some sort of like a tic. He moves, in an odd way, which is to me like, okay, well, that's something visible. Like, why has this not been inquired into for 8 weeks? I don't know. It's $1 million question here. But essentially, the foreperson says, we don't believe that he can follow your honor's instructions. Not that he can't understand your instructions, but he can't follow them. So there was a lot of back and forth. The parties, each side presented their position to the judge, and the judge came back and responded to that note, essentially saying what judges often do with jury notes: go back and try, you're supposed to follow the instructions, do your best, follow the instructions. And this is interesting, Sophia, because this is not the first jury issue we've had. Remember the guy that was supposedly from the Bronx, but then they said, no, he lied. He was really from New Jersey, which I had a problem with, because you could really have two residences when you're in a relationship. You could sleep over your girlfriend's house and still have your, Bronx residence. And now we have a second one. So these are like, we could potentially have a mistrial. So like, I was kind of, on my Uber ride here, I was kind of thinking through, looking forward. First of all, this guy could be a stealth juror, right? And we could be looking at a possibility of a jury nullification. The idea that the jury
100%.
could find him guilty, but still acquit him. And also, if a juror refuses to follow the instructions like the judge admonished him to, the real options are, number one, to dismiss the juror under Rule 23 and 24 and replace them with an alternate. But that'll obviously create an appellate issue because of that swap in and out. Or declare a mistrial, and we'll have to start all over. The question will be, will the government recharge Diddy? And I think they will. So I think
they
that
will too.
either way, I think the defense should be feeling really good today over this jury issue.
I think so too. I mean, but you never know, Sarah. You don't know if which way he was going or what the issue was, because it was kind of this vague, like, we're concerned. I think the thing was, we're concerned he's unable to follow directions. That's concerning to all of us, to be 1 hour into jury deliberation.
Right
and
away.
This guy comes out and he's just like, is he not cooperating? Is he saying, I'm not going to talk about? We have no idea. So it could be going both ways, but this is definitely very bumpy. I don't think, I feel like both sides would be nervous at this point. They'd both be like, which one is it for? Is he?
Yeah, but in my experience, usually, I mean, this is really early on, like you pointed out, Sophia. And I think usually when there's an issue like this so early on, it persists. I don't think, judges are sort of, there's this pressure, number one, for juries to reach a verdict. They don't like to feel like they've done excuse my French, a half-assed job on their civic duty. They like to reach a verdict. There's this self sort of inflicted obligation or duty, right? On top of it, judges want them to reach a verdict, so that's why every time there's a potential of a hung jury, like, no, keep deliberating. Of course, this week we have a holiday, so I'm not sure how much the judge is going to say keep deliberating, but yeah, I mean, I think that, by the way, I think the judge was correct. I think that was vague. It's like, wait a second, it wasn't even an hour. It was less than an hour that they went back there, and they came back saying, we feel like, or whatever. It was not conclusive as to why, but again, people that have been visibly seeing this juror have noticed like a twitch, and which, like, if
how did that go under the radar this whole time?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, the demographics apparently are, I mean, the guy's a scientist, so he could be, I mean, like, you can have certain physical responses and still be in good mental health to think things through and execute. So I don't know. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to think for 8 weeks that this just went like unnoticed by the judge. I mean, it's kind of strange. But anyway, do
you think he is? I'm just really curious because do you think the judge? I know judges do not want to do this. He's going to avoid it like the plague because I think the foreman said, "Can you interview him? Can you talk?" And he was just like, "No, I don't want to get involved right now." Do you think the judge? At what point do you think the judge is going to get involved? And he's just like, "Okay, I need to figure out what's going on here."
Well, I think if this persists and the foreperson comes back and slips another note about an issue with this juror, and is that issue, for lack of a better word, is it just that he just is not agreeing with everyone else, or maybe the foreperson, or is it that he really doesn't understand the instructions? Those are two very different things.
That's true.
Do you
Do you think this is like a stealth juror kind of vibes? Is that what you're getting?
Yeah. That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. I'm saying this could be. It's interesting because we're talking about the skeptical woman, the African American with the big hoops, who's like
Yeah.
smoking. We thought she might be the holdout or the stealth, but it could be this guy. And in which case the judge could replace him with an alternate, which creates an appellate issue.
Yeah.
Or it could be a mistrial. And imagine the defense has made so many mistrial motions throughout these 8 weeks at every turn, which was correct because it lays the grounds for appeal. But now at the very end, this could be the reason for mistrial. It's pretty fascinating to me. So one last question before we close for the day.
Yeah.
This jury also has to believe one act, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, for each charge occurred in New York. Because New York, it's the Southern District of New York that brought this case, which, by the way, I have an interesting insight about that. I want to ask you, have they met their burden of this jurisdictional component? But, when Diddy's homes got raided and there was that big to-do and all that with the media, a very good friend of mine who's now a defense attorney, trial attorney, but at the time was the criminal chief of the Central District of California. So my old backyard as opposed to Southern District. He had signed the warrants for the raids of Diddy's LA homes. And to this day, I give him a hard time. And I say, why would you do that? What, like for Astroglide and baby oil? Like what? I mean, what? And so the
There are also guns and ammunition and drugs.
Yeah, but look, the jurisdictional issue was interesting because he was telling me that this is just not the kind of case that Central District of California would have filed. This is very much a SDNY, thing, dish, specialty, I guess. So anyway, do you think that they have met their burden that at least what did I say? One of the acts occurred in New York.
Yeah, I think if it didn't, we wouldn't even be here right now. I don't think we would get this far if we didn't pass that first hurdle. Jane testified about freak offs happening in New York hotels and New York venues and flying to New York. And so she specifically talked about this one incident in 2023 where she wanted to meet Diddy alone, but it ended up becoming a hotel night and she called an escort. And Cassie obviously talked about many of these trysts taking place in New York. So jurisdictional, I think we're good. That's not going to be a thing.
Yeah. And, in terms of across state lines for the prostitution charge, we're talking about what I remember is LA, Miami, New York. I mean, those are the cities that I recall from testimony. So even though some of their favorite escorts were like in Atlanta or wherever, but they weren't about to fly to Atlanta to the escort, so they flew the escort out to them. But regardless, it is prostitution across state lines. So anyway, Sophia, this is fascinating. And I feel like we're going to get a verdict before the July 4th holiday, don't you?
I do too. Yeah. This morning with juror number 25 definitely threw things off. And the twists and turns continue, but I think so. I don't think anyone wants to be here any longer past the holiday.
And I think the juries all, like, for the most part, they've made up their mind. They have a sort of a general gravitation towards one side or the other. I don't know how many of them for each side, but I definitely know this is split. I don't think that everyone unanimously agrees on every single charge or every victim. But I think that 8 weeks, and remember the 8 weeks, Sophia, on the prosecution side were really more of the same. A lot of assistants just corroborating each other. You had two different accusers with two different sets of like dynamics, but still it was like freak off after freak off. And it just was redundant to some extent. And I understand like everyone added a little piece, but when you think about it, it wasn't like one witness was a blockbuster witness. It was like the prosecution inched its way, just built and built and built like bricks on top of each other until they got to the
I
end.
think
So,
Cassie was blockbuster. I think she was just like the POW witness.
yeah, but she was the first one, right? She was the first one with that video, and that was like the shock factor. Like, what is a freak off? Oh my God, this woman's abused, And then over 8 weeks, it's like, all right, And I think they've made up their mind to some extent. And remember, the defense did not put on any witnesses, but today I was looking at one of their exhibits that they introduced when the prosecution rested, and they were presenting some exhibits. Oh my God, those text messages between Cassie and Diddy. When they last had sex, where she says she was raped, they are really, really bad for her. Really bad for her. Like they completely cancel out any remote possibility of having been raped. I mean, have you seen those, Sophia? Because I'll send it to you.
I haven't seen the text.
Oh, it's really bad. I'm serious. This is not Sarah Azari, the defense attorney. I'm I just read them today and I was like, holy moly, no way she's raped. No way. Because he even said, oh yeah, because you got another man FaceTimed you, blah, blah, blah. I mean, and remember, she really lost. She was a powerful witness, but she lost credibility for me at the end when she was like, I think it was 10 million, the settlement from the hotel. Like, how do you not remember 10 million? And this text message or text thread was like her downplaying another man that she's with, which was probably her husband, her current husband.
It was, yeah, it was her.
Yeah.
This was the one where she said, like, I didn't think this was going to happen. Is that the one where she's like, I didn't want this to happen, but it happened.
But it was fun or something like
yeah,
like not wanting it to happen, but then consenting to it happening. And then over time, regretting that it happened. That doesn't make it coercive. That doesn't make it.
You'll need one instance, Sarah. Just like we talked about earlier with sex trafficking, you need one instance of it being forced and coerced. Yeah,
which is the worst instance for Diddy is the domestic violence at the hotel on video, which happened during the course of a freak off, right there in the middle of the night, whatever, early in the morning. I get it, but if this jury is looking at all this history of consent and is able to divorce a domestically abusive relationship from her consent to this lifestyle, I don't know that they're gonna, and I think they're also gonna be like, she made $30 million. She's good. Like, he doesn't need to be criminally punished for this. You know what I mean?
So, there's a social worker on that jury. There's a somebody who's a social worker on that jury.
Okay.
So I think the whole issue of trauma bonding and all the history and all of that, that could also be a wild card where she can say, look, I get it. Even though she went back, there's a reason behind it. So really anything can happen.
But that's why I say on Cassie, it can very well be a hung jury because there is an abundance of consent. And then you have, some bruising on some occasions. And then that video, the rape thing, forget it. It's canceled out. I'm telling you, but I'll send you the thing. But you have that bad stuff, but then you also have all of this consent. So, I don't know. I don't know. And again, because we have that prostitution charge, I think it makes it easier for the jury to say, you know what, this guy, he was a bad guy, and he was definitely guilty of this. We're going to convict him on this. But we're not going to bother with these women that chose to be around him for whatever reason, whatever. You know what I mean? We got to be out of here. It's July 4th.
Yeah. Hopefully they can all come to an agreement on something, though. Let's see.
Right. We'll see. Anyway, this is fascinating. I'm like trying to figure out my life for the next couple of days. I'm like, can I make this appointment?
Just camp out outside
People
the courtroom.
are asking me, like, can we do lunch? I'm like, I don't know. Depends on if we get a verdict. So anyway, we're all on the edge of our seats. Thank you so much, Sophia, for joining me. And to all of you out there who've been following along, I really appreciate you. speaking of watching, we are on verdict watch, and we are going to stay on it until we have a verdict, and probably beyond. Actually, we're already planning what we're going to do on serving justice after this trial is over. So thanks for staying with us and News Nation, and until tomorrow, the defense rests.
Breaking news coverage continues on News Nation now. I'm Connell McShane in New York. Partial verdict in the trial against Sean Combs. A verdict has been reached on 4 of the 5 counts Diddy was facing. However, the jury has been unable to reach a unanimous conclusion on the most serious charge, the 1 count of racketeering conspiracy. Now, we don't know what the verdict is or whether it's split on those other 4 charges, but we do know the jury has not reached a unanimous verdict on count 1. The judge has told them, last we heard, to keep at it, keep deliberating, but we're waiting for a further update. While we do so, let's continue now with Segun Aduolowo, who's a television host, entertainment journalist, who has joined us a number of times on this show. Great to have you back, my friend, and your reaction to this news as we wait for more news.
Not really surprised, Connell, because when you and I started talking about this case, we always knew that racketeering was going to be the most difficult to prove. How do you say that his music empire was really a front to engage in all of these illicit acts? Listening to the legal minds that were on before me, I agree with some and disagree with the others. I do think that the prostitution charge, counts 2 and 3, seem to be slam dunks for the prosecution, right? It brought prostitutes across state lines or engaged in sex acts by force. But the racketeering charge, which carries the largest sentence, them being deadlocked, I don't think, as one of your guests said, that there's going to be a mistrial, not just with the 4th of July coming up, but imagine having to retry all of this. Cassie, when she was on the witness stand, was pregnant. She's since had her child. I don't think the state wants to go through all of this again. So let's wait and see if more deliberation will happen.
Not today,
I don't think there's going to be. I don't believe there'll be a hung jury.
We just got a note from the jury that they've concluded for the day, okay? So they're going to be back at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Now, here's kind of an interesting way of phrasing it from the reporter down there for the Pix 11 News, Channel 11 here in New York, is our News Nation station, that the jury was instructed to keep deliberating by the judge, but to, quote, not surrender their personal opinions. And then right after that, we got the note saying that they've concluded for the day, back at 9 tomorrow. So keep at it, but don't surrender your personal opinions. Remember earlier, talking about this note, that it appears as if people were dug in on this RICO charge on both sides of it.
Yeah, they have been dug in, and I feel that that kind of admonition by the judge is a little bit of lip service, like keep deliberating, but don't give up your opinion. Well, it's their opinions that they won't give up, which is why they keep deliberating. So yeah, you know what I mean? Like, don't get browbeaten into switching your position, but hold fast if you really feel that that's the case. That seems like splitting the baby way too much for me. I think they are going to go back and deliberate, but if they're dug in on the racketeering, that is the hardest one to prove.